Well, kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui. Welcome from the Indigenous people of my land to the Indigenous people of your land. And I have to start as, I'm a Kiwi, we have to sing. So Peter, you don't have to join me, but I thought I'd pick a waiata, which is about a tree growing in the forest, and it only grows when lots of other big trees envelop around it. And I thought that connects us to the land, it connects our two countries, and the fact that we are here, hopefully, to support you. Peter is going to join me. You too, E tu ka hiketea, he whakapai ururoa, awhi mai awhi atu, tātou tātou e, tātou tātou e. So may we all wrap around each other. However, the reason I'm here is because I have been both a disaster victim, survivor and researcher, and have a lot of little tips I hope that will be useful for you from all those aspects of my life. So let's get started. In the last 10 years, what have I been through? The top picture is my office after the 2010 earthquake. The picture alongside that is myself, my sister and my niece, as we heard that our nephew had been killed in the Pike River mine disaster. The picture underneath is the 2011 earthquake, and that office in the top picture is now in the middle of that building somewhere. And then if that wasn't enough, we've got the mosque massacres down the bottom. So I've been there, done that, I'm with you. I can only give you compassion. That led me to suddenly becoming a disaster researcher. I thought, how do I get people to sort of recognise what they've been through? And because I was a teacher before I was a teacher educator and an academic, I was really aware of what schools were doing, of what teachers were doing. They were fronting up, principals and teachers were fronting up every day with a smile on their faces, regardless of the fact that the husband may have died, they'd lost their house, they'd moved so many times, and yet they turned up. I thought, what can I do? So I started with my friends who were teachers and principals, and some of them said, go away, Carol, just, no, we don't need you. And others said, well, it's got to be on our terms. I went, okay, well, what are your terms? So I worked eventually with 5 different schools who all had completely different terms. In some cases, it was the entire school and the community. In other cases, it was a smaller group, a particular age group, or however they wanted to work it. So we had whatever projects, I became the facilitator. You tell me what you want. You want to make a mosaic? Okay, right, I'll find out how to do that. You want to make a video? Okay, I'm sure I can find someone to help us. So the top 2 pictures are just a couple of those projects. And they ended up taking years. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years I followed those schools. And one of those schools went through the earthquakes. They went through half the school burning down. They went through losing family members in the mosque massacre. And it's as if life just keeps happening and things keep getting thrown at you. But from that work, I ended up being, as you can see along the bottom, being invited to Japan, Nepal, Vanuatu, Samoa. Somehow, I became what my husband calls Dr. Disaster. Everywhere there was a disaster, there was Carol. So this was quite a new field for me. So I had to do a lot of research so that I knew what I was doing and what I was talking about. And I think it's interesting, one of the early pieces of work I did was a massive literature review on what is the role of schools in disaster response and recovery. You can see I've come up with this grid. So schools have a huge role to play in supporting their communities, both before, as part of the response effort, and as the long-term recovery place. And I don't think that that is perhaps recognised as well as it should be. This is a communal thing. Disasters happen to communities, not just to individuals and families and so on. We're very networked. And there are schools right in the middle of it. There's a lot of literature that says what schools should do, but in actual fact, I'm really interested in what schools did do and what did work and what didn't work and how can we help others prepare. And one of the points I'll make later is it just keeps going. But of course, the role of schools is about children and young people. So we have to make sure that whatever we do wraps around those in a really safe way. My research added a little bit extra to that, as you can see. I came up with the idea of schools being community anchors, of places that are well known, that are seen as being safe, that are seen as having people who are wise, even if teachers and principals don't feel wise in these situations. And they are there before it ever happens. They are there especially if it happens on a school day, as happened in Christchurch, as happened in Japan, as has happened in other places. They are literally saving people's lives because they happen to be there. And they are there long after the cameras are gone. Principals suddenly are not principals anymore. They thought they were about educational leaders, but they become crisis managers. Their lives tip upside down as they find themselves managing families who are sleeping in their school hall, or finding resources to keep their community going, or bringing in counsellors or whatever it may be. And part of my research said that the principals who managed to do this well had a certain set of dispositions. They came to it with openness and compassion and flexibility, but they built really good relations within their school and across their community, and they could read the context really well, knowing when to move forward and when to pull back. And teachers. I cannot say enough about teachers, and I've written about this several times where I've said, you know, when they give out all the medals, I don't want to put down firefighters and army and all those wonderful volunteers, but have you seen the teachers lined up getting a medal for turning up day after day after day? Please, somebody remember the teachers. And the other point is that children aren't little passive beings that we go and do things to. They recover much better if they get engaged, if they're invited to have their voices heard, to put forward ideas and decisions. So, some important principles. Schools need to be places of security and calm, balancing both that return to what schooling is about, but also places to start gently processing those experiences. And we've already heard from Sue about some of the ways that can be done. But most of all, children told me that going back to school was because it was somewhere familiar. They wanted to see their teacher, their friends. They wanted to see their old classroom. They wanted to touch things to make sure it was real. And so familiarity and routines, plus learning some new strategies along the way. And I've said there some of the things that are important: rumination, positive reframing, and emotional regulation. We'll have resources up about those. And students need to see that there is hope. Things will never be exactly the same, but out of this, you can thrive. You can learn to live with adversity and move forward. Schools need their own recovery pace and rhythm. They do not need to be constrained by ministries and departments and whoever else, and nor do they need to be overwhelmed by, and these are their words, do-gooders. You need to be invited into a school. You can't arrive with your wonderful program and tell them that you're there. They'll just tell you where to go, as some of them did to me. They also are not trauma counsellors. They can deal with some of that low-level trauma, but there needs to be support for them. And they themselves need to make sure that the resources are there to look after their emotional and mental health, because they are carrying this huge load. So my last slide simply says, what did I learn from all the things that I went through from living in Christchurch in the South Island and having family on the West Coast? Everyone responds differently and at different times. There's no one way of saying this person's traumatised and this person is not. It's all quite different. And everyone has a story. As recently as last week, I was in a school and the caretaker is busy telling me his earthquake story from 2011. It still lives with him every day. And amidst the grief, as you all know from the bushfires, are amazing stories of kindness and humanity. We have to hold on to those. They give us hope. Stress is cumulative and bureaucracies do not help. So band together and speak back to bureaucracy. But another thing we're not aware of too is the social and health and mental health secondary stresses, the financial problems, the grief that comes about. All of these add up and make it really difficult. So mental health resources are so important. I can't stress that enough. So we have to make sure that what we do before a disaster happens means our communities are ready to cope and our schools are ready to cope. We need to act collectively, and resilience is not a magic bullet. It's really, really hard work. But one day, there is light in the darkness.